If you give us 6 to 8 weeks to build up our assets in a region, and the mission is precision strike against an enemy who has no effective integrated air defense, they're going to lose.
Hello, and welcome to Working with me, Dan Doriani, hosting a podcast where we explore faith, work, culture, and the way believers can make a difference in their corner of the world. Well, my guest today is Jim Talent. Jim, you are high on my list of people that I wish I saw more.
Oh.
Yeah.
No, very kind of you.
Well,
thank you.
Every time we get together, it's
Not
a pleasure.
everybody says that, so thank you.
Well, every time we get together, we have a good conversation.
That is true.
So Jim is Jim Talent. Can be introduced properly as Senator Jim Talent, U.S. Senator, and also a representative, House of Representatives, multiple terms, and has also had a variety of roles in the defense angle of the U.S. government. So That's why you're our guest today. We're talking about just war and the wars that are going on. Right now, it's March of 2026. There's a number of wars going on.
Right.
I'm going to also mention that you are an elder in a PCA church, Trinity Church, which is a wonderful church, and you're a serious student of Scripture, so that will inform everything you have to say. Say just a word, Jim. Don't boast, but tell us why I would call upon you to help us out with some deeper knowledge about warfare and how the U.S. government actually conducts war and what it knows and what it aims for.
Well, and thank you, by the way. It's very kind of you to particularly call me a serious student of Scripture. I was telling my wife this morning, said I got a podcast. She said, with whom? I said, Dan Doriani. And I said to her, I never listen to Dan without learning something. So I really appreciate the chance to be here. I served 4 terms in the House and 1 in the Senate, and all of those years, beginning in 1993, I was on the House Armed Services Committee or the Senate Armed Services Committee. I chaired the Sea Power Subcommittee in the Senate. Interesting for a senator from Missouri to chair the Sea Power Subcommittee, but naval power is obviously very important. Since I left the Senate, I have served on a number of different high-end senior advisory committees, two quadrennial review commissions, which are graybeard commissions. One of them led by Secretary Bill Perry, former secretary, and names you would recognize, that to review the plans and the force structure of the Department of Defense. I was 8 years on the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission, which examines, among other things, the security relationship between the United States and China. I've chaired or co-chaired a number of task forces on various security issues. So I've stayed in, and I've cycled through the Heritage Foundation, AEI, the Bipartisan Policy Center, all examining different aspects, mostly of national defense. And now I'm a senior fellow at the Center for Peace Through Strength at the Reagan Institute in Washington. So, yes,
vast experience.
If you were putting me on as an expert witness in a trial, the judge would let me testify as an expert. That doesn't mean opposing counsel wouldn't impeach my credibility.
I understand that. And I'm sure you probably could have gone on at more length. But we have a lot of wars going on right now.
Right.
So it's 2026 spring, which means on our minds very much is a war undeclared between the United States and Iran. But of course, we've had 4+ years of war between Ukraine and Russia, very much on our minds. We both have some Russian background, so it's hard to forget about that. And maybe we both have Ukrainian background since there's some interplay. Hard to tell, hard to be sure. Porous borders and all that. But of course, Israel's been at war with Hamas, or you could say Hezbollah and Iran, pretty hard since October 7th, 2023. And there are other conflicts going on. So how can you tell 2 countries are at war, especially when they hardly ever say it anymore?
Okay, I'll
pretend I'm your 12-year-old grandson.
We're talking about war, and so I'm going to be serious. In a technical sense, people actually argue about that.
They do.
I mean, particularly when there are constitutional implications, as there are now. And wars have been called police actions, incursions,
conflicts.
Conflicts, exercises. I mean, the more sanitary term that you'll hear in the defense community is armed conflict. Which is also an attempt at a definition. So, and also, we're not sure whether war it refers only to kinetic actions.
Right.
So, for example,
cyber war
is one, and then they're not sure how to classify that. But then the other thing is, and this is something the Pentagon's picked up on a lot in the last few years, is that the narrative domain, the contest for hearts and minds, if you want to call it that way, is considered to be a domain of conflict.
Okay.
And so
it's not armed conflict, obviously.
Not armed conflict. That's one of the reasons they say armed conflict.
Right.
Okay. So one of the things that planners look at is, okay, when do wars really begin? How can we contest them in all their domains? But I mean, armed conflict is as good an example or as good a lay definition or routine definition as you can have. And it would be of a sustained nature.
Not some diplomats yelling at each other.
Right.
But trying to undermine a government.
Or not
perhaps.
even a targeted, like, one-off thing. It's of a sustained nature against a nation state or, and this is another fairly new development, against subnational groups which have organized to the point of constituting irregular armies or having armed capabilities. That's how I would define it.
Like the Kurds, for example.
But however you define it, the war in Ukraine is a war, and the war going on as we speak in the Middle East is a war.
So I'm going to ask for a real simple definition. How can you tell two nations are at war then? You're saying maybe the best way is that they're shooting at each other.
They're shooting each other, through organized armed forces.
Right, not random people taking pot shots, but massed forces with firepower, concentrated, et cetera. Okay. So, there's a couple topics. We talked about them beforehand a little bit. One is justice to war. The other is justice in war. So I'm going to give a summary real quick, and then you can question. So you're the expert on the political side, and I teach ethics. So I'm just going to summarize what allows two nations to go to war, and we'll ask then how this applies today. So for centuries, people have been studying this. Augustine and Aquinas were saying this, 1,600, 1,700 years ago, because they lived in times of warfare, and people like Hugo Grotius and so forth have theorized about this at length, and they say the following things. Number one, you have to have a just cause. You have to have real injury, not putative or asserted injury that's in fact almost nothing. No war on the basis of a pretext. That's number one. Real injury. There has to be a legitimate authority either declaring war or we would say maybe now carrying out the war. That is to say, it's not some renegade captain.
Right.
It's the people in charge of the armed forces properly prosecuting, and it can be a government that declares it. That's number two. Number three, a right intention, and that is peace. Now, we probably easily agree that the war between Russia and Ukraine has a right intention from the Ukrainian side, defense of their land, their people, civilians, and not a just cause from the Russian side. The Russians say they do have a just cause. But a just cause means defending the poor, the widow, the orphan, the defenseless, defending land from being seized, has to be a last resort. That is to say, you try negotiations first, and you try maybe other forms of negotiation or threats. Maybe if you do this, we'll do that. So you do everything you can to prevent armed hostilities or armed conflict. And then two more, and one is proportionality of ends. That is to say, you don't wage a war over a minor matter, and the likelihood of success, which of course then gets into a very difficult area. Likelihood of success means if Genghis Khan is invading your city, you might just want to give up. Because if you lose, and you almost certainly will, you're all going to die. Alexander the Great largely won because of the threat of killing everybody.
And when were these theories first developed, or what time frame are you
So Augustine Augustine died in 430 AD, while the various quote-unquote barbarians were invading. They were actually at the gates of his city when he died. Thomas Aquinas, 1250 to 1275. There's a lot of warfare at that period of time. And then people like Grotius and others were living in the 16th and 17th centuries when there was, again, a lot of war, like the 30 Years' War. So these are people who are enmeshed. They weren't engaged in a mere theory. They were trying to guide the people in their societies from a position of theological and social authority.
Yeah. How would they have dealt with the idea of a preemptive war? So in other words, which is a real issue today because war moves so quickly.
Yes.
In other words, if a nation is a unquestionable threat and unquestionably has capabilities, and you wait for them to attack,
Right.
the damage could be much greater. And that's a real thing in a way that probably was not true in earlier days before technology has made war so much quicker and so much more deadly.
You're exactly right. So in the 4th and 5th and 12th and 13th centuries, this simply isn't a problem. You would see the armies massing, you would mass your own armies at the borders and so forth. Even in the 17th century, very similar. But I mean, I'll pass it back to you. But maybe by way, I'll throw out a comment. If there is a case for a just war in America against Iran, one of the leading indicators would be that they're developing nuclear weapons, and that Ayatollah Khamenei, for years and years and years, ended speech after speech with death to America, death to Israel.
Which they operationalized to the extent they were capable of doing.
Exactly.
I mean, any of our listeners or viewers can Google Iranian attacks on Americans.
Which started in 1979, 1983.
Kidnapping
and
the diplomats. You've read the history of war. I mean, that's a heinous offense at any time. They have attacked America, Americans at home, Americans abroad, American diplomats, American servicemen and women, American shipping. And so therefore, not only threatened, but actually attacked and damaged in a significant way the first most core vital national interest of the United States, which is defense of the homeland and all of those other things. And in addition, I mean, the two vital interests of the United States that everybody recognizes as vital. I mentioned I did these quadrennial review commissions. You go back and look at the 2010 one where we talk about what is it we want the force to protect. Mm-hmm. You know, the homeland and then the right of Americans to move, trade, and travel in the world, in the international commons, peaceably and on the same terms as everybody else.
Yes.
So if you go back through, I mean, and that's something we've defended since the Barbary Pirates, War of 1812.
Right.
In fact, even World War I, you can argue, was caused when the Germans decided they were going to do unrestricted submarine warfare. Just couldn't tolerate that.
Right.
So, and it's Iran. And since the fall of Saddam Hussein, Iran has been unquestionably the chief adversary, not only an adversary in the Middle East. They have committed numerous acts of war against us. Now, having said that...
Can I interrupt? Would you say that taking our embassy was an act of war?
I'm a causus belli.
And then another...
the killing 250 Marines in Beirut.
Right.
The Kobar Towers in 96. Right. I mean... And again, and everybody understands this, as you say, they brag about it. It's the only reason they haven't done more is they haven't had the ability to do more.
Right.
It's kind of like, the devil wants to destroy us all. It's just he can't, right? I mean, if he could, he would, right?
Yes, exactly.
And I guess this, actually, I shouldn't I'm in the middle of the seminary. I shouldn't throw around terms, but I mean, it is pretty diabolical the way they act. So now, having said all that, they weren't in the process of attacking us actively and visibly. Right. And as a matter of fact, they couldn't as much because, and you mentioned this, over the last 2.5 years, the Israelis have fought a war on at least 4 fronts against Iran and their proxies, and have won all of them.
Yes.
Okay, and have therefore degraded and exposed Iran, particularly their anti-air defenses. So was this I absolutely believe it was necessary and will save lives, because we are, to stop an aggressor, or really any kind of action is the product of intention and capability.
Correct.
Okay. So deterrence, or stopping an attack, to stop an attacker, you have to change their intention or reduce their capability, or both, right? Mm-hmm. And
so can I just spell that out a tiny bit? Reduce their capability includes things like sinking their Navy, sinking their airplanes. But changing their intention would include things like, if you keep this up, the consequences will be dire. Do you understand this?
Yes. Every American president. I'm trying to think of what W did. He was so occupied with Iraq, I don't think that there was any real...
W means George W. Bush.
Yeah. But, I mean, let's take the last 3. I mean, Obama, it was a central piece of his Middle Eastern policy was to lure Iran into being a responsible regional actor. Now,
didn't
I didn't
very
think
well.
much of it, but he was.
That was the goal.
He was trying to change their intention, and he effectively almost bribed them. I mean, he sent pallets of cash and other things. I'm not criticizing that as a tactic. I just say it was never going to work. Mm-hmm. Biden tried renewing that. At that point, they were so confident in their abilities that they basically laughed at Robert Malley and the other diplomats that Biden sent. And then Trump has tried to change capability by, in effect, extorting them. They're saying, look, if you don't change, thus and thus and so. And all of these presidents have sustained a sanctions regime against them, which was designed to do both, to cause them to change their intention, but also
to lose financial capacity to wage war.
And none of that has worked. I mean, the Iranian strategy, which was, their strategic goal was to dominate the Middle East, most especially their Arab Sunni neighbors, and enforce their view of Sharia law and Islam on the region. Of course, that involved attacking Israel, and of course, that involved destroying the United States. And before October 7th, they controlled Lebanon through Hezbollah. They controlled Syria, or had a big measure of control through Bashar Assad.
Right.
They controlled Gaza through Hamas. They controlled part of Yemen, a substantial part, through the Houthis. And they had this enormous arsenal of ballistic missiles, along with a very active nuclear program. And this was all, it was all studied. It was brilliant, really. In other words, they could attack through the proxies.
But by brilliant, you don't mean good brilliant. You mean a brilliant execution of a bad plan.
Yeah. Brilliant's a morally neutral term, isn't it? You can have brilliant,
Just
really
make
evil
sure
people.
Somebody's going to say that Jim Talent thinks Iran is a brilliant nation, and I'm trying to protect you.
Look, if anything, if any regime is evil, that's an evil regime, and which its own people. And it's a tremendous irony because because of your study of all this, not just history there, but also because of the ties with the scripture and the biblical story. The Iranian people are, I mean, the proudest. It's a nation that goes back thousands of years, the most sophisticated. They were the most Western. For them to have a regime like this is really...
It kills them. It's torturing.
Just incredible.
Them. And, of course, in every woe, there's a silver lining or some good, and that is that enormous numbers of Iranians are renouncing Islam, and many are becoming Christians because they see this perverted version of Islam and the worst that it can do, and they want no part of it.
All things work together for good, right? Yeah. For those who love God and are called according to his purpose. And you no doubt have seen through the halls of the seminary a number of, probably, I assume, Iranian expats, or you've seen people here.
We certainly have Middle Eastern students.
Okay, people who know the area. So the point is, the attack occurred now, and I get a lot of people, why now? Well, because the military overmatch right now is enormous.
Yes.
Yeah, and I say to people...
So there was a window, in other words.
War is not... all this preparatory to your question, what do you think about this in terms of just war theory?
Yeah.
War is not, the NFL. We don't want parity, competitive parity, right? We don't want a fair fight. You owe it to your servicemen and women, if you can...
To have an advantage, a big advantage.
Right. And I will tell you, and I've said this on national shows, I do a couple local. At the beginning of this thing, anybody who knew anything about the American defense enterprise knew that if you give us 6 to 8 weeks to build up our assets in a region, and the mission is precision strike against an enemy who has no effective integrated air defense.
Or the minute they fire, we say, okay, there's their missile launcher.
Well, it's not effective. They couldn't get Asia, right? In other words, they're going to lose.
Right.
Okay, the surface striking power of the United States Navy, and this is before you get to the Israelis. We have the two most operationally effective. The Chinese are very powerful, but there's a question as how operationally effective they are.
Right.
Okay.
Like the question about Russia.
Yeah.
Huge army, lots of tanks. Can they use them well?
Can't beat Ukraine.
Right.
Can't engage in maneuver warfare.
Right.
It's World War I with drones is what it is. It's which means it's not World War I, but still. So you knew what was going to happen. And the specific goal, the United States will certainly change capability. We're already doing that.
It's already largely accomplished at this moment, right?
They will have no a fraction. Effectively, they'll have no inventory of missiles, drones, and they will have no ability to make more because we're destroying their defense industrial base. And the combination of the factors I mentioned before, plus Israeli intelligence, which is nobody's ever seen anything like this. I mean, and the ability. So Now, the question is, will it change intention?
Right. Or the debate would go something like this. We've been, in their eyes, the great Satan for decades. They have, against all their own internal principles, said the son of Khamenei is our new leader. Islam scorns the idea of hereditary leadership, and yet they've done it. And one way of looking at it is he already hated America, and now they killed his whole family. And so the hatred will be deeper than ever. And so that does bring the last question about a just war in front of us. That is to say, even if there is a just cause and all their avenues have been exhausted, is there any chance of success? Now, success is defined different ways, right? One way to define it is they have lost their ability to wage war against Israel or against us. And I realize some of our listeners may be unhappy with me saying this. I think there's a very real reason to take people seriously when they say, we want to destroy you. And then if they get a nuclear weapon, they might be very willing to use that, even if it means catastrophic loss on their side. But the other question is, do we just kick the can down the road and there's going to be another conflict in 10 years, 30 years, 40 years, 100 years, et cetera? So you've kind of been answering that, but do you want to add anything?
But from a just war, I mean, I think I'm not addressing this from a refined doctrine of just war, but as I think a reasonably principled American former leader, I thought it was obvious that we needed to do this because we could certainly at least break their capability, which gives
before
us,
it's fully developed and operationalized.
Yes. If we don't do it, the problem, I mean, it is silly to believe that somehow the problem is going to go away if we did nothing. And so if we waited till the threat was imminent, then by definition, the risk of the mission, we would lose a lot more people. There might be a possibility of losing, and not to mention, I mean, putting our own civilians at risk and other civilians at risk. So I think this was absolutely the right thing to do. So I'm inclined to say it has to be just. I mean, it's going to save lives. It also gives a possibility for an actual, stable, peaceful Middle East, because the other nation states in the Middle East, and a little bit of an oversimplification, have at least de facto accepted Israel. Okay.
Yeah, now, not legally.
Not legally, and I'm not saying they love them.
Right.
But really, since they lost 3 wars in 25 years.
Right.
And this is, the Abraham Accords represent this, but the others basically want to live at peace, and they want to develop, and they want a stable region.
Prosperity.
And they don't want to be threatened, yes.
Peace.
And so if the aggressor is removed or defanged, the possibility that we could get an equilibrium in the Middle East with a partnership, in essence, the Gulf states, Egypt, Jordan, Israel, maybe Syria even, and Lebanon possibly, depending what happens to Hezbollah there. So now we're talking about peace, maybe a generational peace.
Which has not been seen for a very long time.
Which cannot happen as long as, A, the Islamic Republic exists, not Iran, the Islamic Republic, and B, has some capabilities to do something about it.
Yeah. Let me say thank you. That's a good answer, and it's a terrific answer.
But you haven't said now, does that mean it's a just war or not a just war?
I do believe it's a just war. I believe that we should expect people to do what they say they will do, especially if they've done it many times according to the ability they have. So Iran says they want to destroy Israel, and they've tried to do that, as you say, given the capacities they have. And they've been saying they want to kill America, death to America, for decades. And they have attacked Americans where they could, not on American soil. And if they had nuclear weapons, I think we should expect them to then develop ballistic missiles that could reach America, because they have said they would do this, and they've done it to the extent that they could for decades.
And
so why expect them to not do what they say they do when they've already been doing it?
Yeah. A couple of, they're tied at the hip, or their proxy Hezbollah is, to the narco gangs in the Western Hemisphere. They launder the money for them. They have themselves referred to the axis of resistance. I mean, there is a connect between a lot of these extremely unsavory elements.
You mean, for example, in Mexico or in Colombia?
Right. And the narco-terrorists are a combination of like enormous gangs and irregular armies with
Right.
tentacles. I mean, it's a really unsavory. We can
Right.
like or don't like what the administration's doing about it. It's just terrible.
We'll leave that aside for
Yes.
now. Yes.
And the other point, Norman, and people who do what I have done and still am doing in more of an advisory role think about this a lot. Okay, the information age in particular has rendered the American homeland vulnerable, legitimately and in reality vulnerable, in a way that was not true, has not been true since the British were able to steam up and down. Because the oceans no longer protect us.
Right.
Cyber is one.
Right.
Space is another. Okay, because our economy is so dependent on the space
Satellites.
architecture. But it isn't even that. If you'll recall, the operation the Ukrainians pulled off against Russia, where they had parked a couple trucks near a Russian base, they had drones in there, and then by remote control, from hundreds and hundreds of miles
Right.
away, they attacked the base.
Blew up the trucks.
Yes.
Right.
Well, there is no reason you could not
Do something similar.
Yes, you've got a ship offshore in New York,
Right.
and you plant them there, and these can be very substantial attacks. I mean, so it drives security people crazy,
Right.
because not to mention,
Envisioning all these possibilities is what you mean.
not to mention like a bioagent. I mean, and none of this was really true during the Cold War.
Right. 50 years ago.
It took a pretty sophisticated nation state to present an existential or mass destruction threat to the United States, and it's not true now. And so,
Right.
letting these threats hang around, sort of on the assumption that they'll never get to the point where they can do something about it, is. I try and tell people, and you're kind to let me go on, but okay, all these presidents, they're actually human beings, and my experience with all of them is when they get the job, and then they're at the end of the table, and they're getting briefed. They're sitting.
They're getting all the information.
They're getting all the information and all this stuff. They become pretty serious about this stuff because they're responsible for trying to prevent it. Now, I think some of them done some incredibly dumb things. Don't get me wrong.
But they're serious-minded. They're sober-minded, even
Right.
if you don't agree with their judgments.
Yeah, because they don't want these things to happen.
Let me switch a little bit to the question of good conduct of a war.
Yeah.
So you and I agree, and our listeners may not, but we've made the case that this is a just war. And we would also say, of course, that Israel defending itself against Iran and Hamas and Hezbollah is just. And we certainly agree that Ukraine has every right to defend itself.
I do.
And that it's proper. It looked like it was going to be futile, but they have actually shown astonishing
That's a fascinating conflict.
resilience and strength of character. So we all agree those are just wars. But then, of course, there's the problem of conduct in war, which starts with moral injury of the warrior. That is to say, somebody who shoots and kills somebody, or if they shoot a missile, launch munitions that they know are killing people. A couple things can happen. One, they can be stricken with guilt for a long time. The other is that they work themselves into a position of hating, despising, dehumanizing the opponent, which then hurts their soul, their spirit in another way. So there's moral injury in war. There's also the danger of escalation. There's the danger of the fog of war. Fog of war means we have much better information, but I know you know what it means. But it means too many decisions have to be made too fast. Literally, you can't see what's going on in times past, all the gunpowder in the air. You don't know who you're shooting at. Fog of war today would mean more like insufficient information. You've got to decide right now, is this blip on the screen hostile or not? And occasionally, once in a while, something that looks hostile is not, and people die as a consequence. Escalation is the perpetual tendency to go toward total war unless somebody reins it in. And that, of course, as we both know, would have been a marker of World War II, no matter how just that war was and is. Once, let's say, the Germans and Japanese were using total war methods, wiping out civilians if they could, the Allies unfortunately retaliated in kind. And it seems that moral judgment begins to falter as time goes by. And then, of course, the final question is, which I've already hinted at, is how can you love your neighbor as yourself? How can you have, Augustine said, you have to have inner love toward your adversary, even in war, not gloating or exulting in the fact you killed somebody, grieving that you had to kill maybe Augustine could pull that off. He was a really good guy.
Now, have you ever preached a sermon on that particular
I have
passage?
spoken to that.
Where you said, now you must, loving your enemy or even your neighbor means you must feel that inner love towards them.
I have said that. I don't know if anybody buys it.
Really?
But
because it's not a sentiment, is it? It's not really a feeling.
No,
isn't it a commitment?
It is
to sacrifice your interests to theirs. Isn't that?
I think the key issue. I would say there's multiple answers to that question. One is, first of all, if let's say the Belgians and the Dutch and the French had resisted the Nazis successfully, they would have done the Germans a favor.
Oh, yeah.
Because millions of Germans died, old men, young men, children, women, soldiers in the prime of life, because they weren't stopped.
Yeah.
So it's actually, we look at it individualistically, but we should look at it corporately. To conduct a just war well is to preserve a nation from going into a war that will be destructive to it,
right,
to the aggressor, both in terms of damage and loss, but also to their spirit as well.
And from a biblical and eternal perspective, the destruction of them may be worse if they win, right?
Exactly.
Because
much worse, because they get the habit of dehumanizing and abusing and enslaving and exploiting.
And we know they
forth.
Pay a price for that absolute resentment.
Their
right?
spirit is corrupted.
Repentance, pardon me, yeah.
Apart from repentance, absolutely. So, but the warfare literature shows that before you go to war with a people, it's very common to dehumanize them.
Mm-hmm.
They're subhuman, they're not really people, they're barely of the same human race that we are. And then that makes it possible for someone to kill a person who's not really a person. They look like a person, but they're not. So Augustine would say, and I would agree, that we have to constantly remember this is a person. Even if you're shooting at them, they have a mother and a father and a brother, sister, a child perhaps. And we have grief that we have to kill them. Now, not everybody can pull that off. But I believe a disciple could honestly pray for their enemy, even as they go about going into war against them.
I can see that. It was the reference to I took Augustine to mean you have to have this sentiment of love. Or
it's more like it's more like a resolve.
You can love somebody biblically without liking them. Right. Okay.
Right. It's having in the case of war, it's respect, not affection.
Well, I'm going to. They don't really need defense, but I will defend or explain that America's armed forces follow, not explicitly for biblical reasons, but the Army manual, the other manuals are meant to incorporate those kinds of principles: the proportionate use of force, attempts to avoid civilian harm, or indeed damage that's unnecessary, collateral damage.
Yes.
Now, on the understand,
but which means schools or water supply, things like that.
On the understand, and one of the, you want to say the good things about military technology is we are now capable of precision strike. And there's actually a sort of irony also that I've commented on a few times in some interviews. The old saying, which was true, the old men decide, like me, decide we're going to go to war. It's the young men who have to pay the price. Well, what we're seeing now in modern warfare, that actually the old guys sometimes have to pay a price too. I mean,
how so? Explain
the
that.
Israelis are taking out the and we've done some of that too. They're decapitating the leaders.
Yep.
And there is a certain justice to that. I mean, these are the religious, ideological, political fanatics that have driven Iran, to this. I mean, they just are.
They have ordered murder.
Yeah.
Of children.
Right.
Like in the October 7th attacks.
And their own people. And just and really.
Yes. Syria, for example.
I mean, they're really about the worst. And that's that's saying a lot. So the services operate that way. Now a key thing is, and you'll get to a level of granularity here, where you would need to talk to somebody who had served and was a commander of people and understood, talk to the chief of staff about how the services operate. But the better trained you are, and the more the training understands those issues, okay, the better protection and the more help we can give our men and women in uniform. We have a professional military. They're not mercenaries, okay?
Right.
And we want it to be lethal. We made it lethal but their training incorporates the kinds of principles and the kinds of equities.
Conduct
that
yourself
you're
with
talking-
justice.
Yes, exactly.
Not no torture.
And in
famously.
addition, the services have become more sophisticated over the years. So, at least in theory and often in practice, there are services available to help people, veterans who are struggling with this. Okay, the VA does a lot of this. People dealing with
counseling
the
after the
fallout.
fact,
Yes,
right.
absolutely.
But also preparatory work.
Yeah, and here you're getting. It's not like I've ever studied this, I doubt it's in like basic. I would be surprised to hear that the training does not include or take into account the kinds of reactions that people have in combat, and it would depend in part on the kind of expected combat. I mean, you mentioned there's a difference between, you're pushing a button or whatever to send a missile, and the fight we had to do in Fallujah, where the Marines went house to house.
Right.
So I think we do it as well as you can do it, which is not to say it's perfect. And the Israelis do the same. Actually, the Israelis, the ratio of civilian to military deaths, for example, in Gaza, that the Israelis were able to achieve was the best in the history of warfare.
Wow.
They did better than we did during the Iraqi war because they've gotten so good at trying to be proportionate and at shielding civilians. Now, part of the reason for that is because they take such criticism.
Right.
And,
But it's publicized and exaggerated and so forth. Yeah.
But anybody familiar with Israeli society knows they're unusually morally conscientious people. This may go with the religion to some extent, right?
Yes.
Which is a lot about the moral law.
Although they're pretty atheistic people, they still hold on to the morals.
Well,
for some reason.
actually, Israeli society is very interesting because they have a lot of religious Jews, and then they have a lot of secular Jews, and it was officially founded more or less as a secular country.
Right.
The Zionist movement was not about religious ends.
Right.
So anyway, I've gone on and on. I think in terms of the hows that you're talking about, we do as well as you can do, and I think we do pretty darn well to anticipate and deal with that, to make sure that we're fighting, waging war as ethically as you can. But I'll just close by saying this: when I was in the Congress and when I comment now, you fight to win. I mean,
Yes.
war is ugly. The best thing you can do is win quickly and end it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so no, I don't want our guys to pull any punches that they need to throw in order to carry out their missions. And it's the job of the higher up civilians to protect them from criticism under those circumstances. You're going to fight, you got to fight to win.
Two things. One, we did have a student here who's now an instructor at our war college a few years ago who worked. I've spent hours with him on these very issues, on how to
So he
train
knows,
people.
You exposed an
Dispositionally.
area of my non-expertise because I can't
Well-
recall ever sitting in a hearing or anything where these issues came up.
Yeah, I mean they actually send. I mean the war colleges and the academies send people for ethical training, and this is the one I got to know. But I've met others over the years who, they've gone to other schools and somehow
Our
we've
officer
met
and
each other.
NCO training taken as a whole, some of it formal in the schools, some of it obviously on the job.
Right.
We have the best junior officer and NCO class in the world. That's a big problem the Russians have, for example.
Right.
They don't have a
They don't
good
have a high
NCO.
caliber
Right.
of subordinate
They don't.
leadership.
Yeah.
Let me ask you one more question. What would you say if you had 20 minutes? Well, 2 minutes, let's make it. 'Cause if you had a minute with a group of men, they're primed, they've heard all, let's say they ask a follow-up question. They're all Christians, they've heard you, they've listened to this podcast. They said, Senator Talent, please give us some advice. We are all in the armed services. We are all going to have a role in the next conflict or the current conflict. How can I conduct myself as a disciple with integrity?
I get that question in other contexts. I think there's no question it's applicable, but I don't know it's precisely the right thing to say to that kind of a group. But when the Lord sent out the apostles on the missionary journey, what did he tell them to do? Be as shrewd as serpents and innocent as
doves. Yeah.
This is the general application, or I think that to me is the scripture, which Christians, particularly in secular occupations, which obviously includes the military,
Right.
ought to follow, which is be smart, but you're operating within limits that non-believers may not be operating within.
Right.
That's what the innocent means, is there are limits. You can't use exactly the same tools that other people use.
We can't be Machiavellian.
Yeah. You may
Right.
be able to use some of the same tools.
Right.
Certainly you will. Okay. But then where those limits are, and you're the one who's, you've written books and taught about this, how you can function at work, at any work. It's not always easy. And reasonable people can disagree. Now, I would also say to them, because I'm not sure people do put it this way to them, about the importance of what they're doing. So the armed forces, the primary purpose of the armed forces of the United States is to be able to deter the kind of kinetic aggression we're talking about and give the tools of civilian national power time and space and energy to work. In other words, I don't want them to get into wars and then win. I want us to be so strong that they don't have to do it. And it's the foundation of the entirety of American security and American foreign policy, not because they should be the go-to tool, but because the other tools won't work without it. Okay?
That's the last resort principle.
Yes. As George Kennan, the containment theory guy, said one time, he said, it's amazing how much more pleasant diplomacy is when you have some armed force in the background. What they are doing, their faithfulness and their effectiveness, is the foundation of the security for their country. It's not the only thing we have, but it's what makes all the rest of it work.
Deterrence is the best. And if I may, I'm going to close with a story about a captured interchange. The phenomenon of things being heard that aren't supposed to be heard. So apparently an American plane at one point wandered over and was close to Iranian airspace 10 or 15 years ago. And they got a message saying, hey, airplane, American airplane, you're in airspace, get out. Or airplane, you're an airplane, get out of our airspace. So I'm not in your airspace, I'm not going to get out. You're misreading the instrumentation. No, you are in our airspace, get out of our airspace, or we're going to send up some fighter jets. And the reply was, I'm an F-15, come on up.
Oh, wow. Yep.
And that was the end of the conversation.
They never sent anybody.
They didn't send anybody because of deterrence.
Deterrence.
We want to deter. We want to prevent. So that's a very short story. Jim, it's always a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us and for staying sharp in these fields as well as others. And honestly, also for helping lead your church.
Thank you. And I have once again learned something.
Okay, great. Well, I learned
about
many
just
things.
war theory. So thank you, Dave.
All right. Thanks a lot. Thanks for coming.
Bye-bye.
Working with Dan Doriani is a production of the Center for Faith and Work St. Louis. We seek to promote faithfulness in the workplace, in education, in discipleship, and in the stories of believers who've applied their faith at work. If you want to put your faith to work and change your corner of the world, visit our website, the Center for Faith and Work St. Louis. Look for faithandworkstl.org. That's one word. We'll help you start a cohort with like-minded believers who also want to practice their faith at work. This podcast is donor-supported. To keep us going, please donate on our website. Maybe more importantly, you can support us by listening, by subscribing, by sharing, by liking us, by posting us on your favorite platform, or go old school and tell a friend.